All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Annika Lee, and I'm the Public Affairs Coordinator at the Digital Supercluster, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our town hall today. Before we get started, we respectfully acknowledge that in Canada, we live, work, and learn on the unceded and traditional and ancestral land of Indigenous people. As myself and much of the Supercluster team are based in Vancouver, British Columbia, we are gathered here on the traditional ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And we encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge and let us know in the chat the traditional territory that you are joining us from. As you heard, this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to all registrants afterwards. Please keep yourselves on mute, and for optimal viewing, select speaker view. And if at any point during the session you have a question, please type it into the chat and we'll address them accordingly throughout the session. I'd now like to hand it over to Bill Tam.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I recognize we have a lot of folks that have joined us from across the country, so welcome. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Again, for those who don't know me, I'm one of the co-founders of the Digital Supercluster, and this is a bit of a reboot from the work that many of you were involved with in the first chapter of our journey when we put together the proposal in 2017 and 2018 that awarded us the Digital Supercluster mandate over the last 4.5 years. I'd like to also introduce my colleagues, Karen McClure, who is our Chief Investment Officer, and also Cindy Goodfellow, who runs our talent and development programs, who will be joining me in this presentation today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share screen and just share with you a presentation that I'll walk through today. And I think there's a few things we want to do on the agenda today. This is really a town hall to explore what priorities we might want to examine in phase 2. And for all of you who are on screen, feel free to chat on the chat windows, because I know a number of you haven't had a chance to connect in quite some time. And we're hoping that we can actually bring back some of the in-person sessions in the next little while. But in the meantime, it's great to see everybody. So can everyone see my screen? Annika, am I on screen now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, perfect, great. So we really have one objective today, and that is to gather your perspectives and input towards our strategy for phase 2. I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey thus far, and in particular, give some background up front. So in the most recent federal budget, it provided a renewal of the Supercluster mandate. In fact, it was $750 million towards a renewed and rebranded Global Innovation Cluster Program. And we have some of our colleagues from the Government of Canada with us on this meeting, but essentially, I think it reflects the government's confidence in the program and provides all of us with an opportunity to capitalize on the momentum that we built to date and really kind of build towards a phase 2. So this allocation exercise will be determined through a competitive process. And so we are in the midst of preparing our application proposal as part of this phase 2. And all of these funding decisions from the government will be determined later this year. So for the purposes of this afternoon, what I'd like to do is really sort of two parts of this. The first part is to talk about our journey to date and reflect a bit on our learnings in both our technology innovation programs, as well as our capacity building and talent program, and hear a little bit from some of our member experiences around that. And then what I'd like to do is switch over to the second part, which is to put forward some ideas based on our conversations with many of you in our member community on some investment themes, areas of focus, and to try to align that with what we've been getting as input and directions from our investors in the Government of Canada, and really open it up for discussion and perspectives from all of you. Feel free along the way to put questions in the chat, and I'll ask Annika to be my eyes and ears for anything that we might want to tackle. So for those of you who are a bit more new to the Digital Supercluster, I just want to recap the journey that we've been on, which is really with a mandate to accelerate the development, adoption, and scaling of digital technologies with a primary focus in the areas of health, addressing environment and climate change, driving economic growth, and really building the skills that are necessary for tomorrow's economy. So the focus has been in the areas of health and well-being, sustainability and natural resources, digital solutions around digital transformation primarily, and an inclusive digitally skilled workforce. And of course, all of this is centered around a theme that we can harness the power of data to drive this transformation. And many of you have probably seen some of the World Economic Forum statistics on this, that digital does really matter. 87% of companies say digital will be disruptive to their industry. It's going to be valued at more than $100 trillion. And the other element of this, which is actually a new discovery, is just the importance of digital in the context of what we're trying to do around emissions reduction and sort of our fight on climate. So it could contribute as much as 20% towards the elimination of emissions. Now, we're quite fortunate. Canada has ranked among the top digital countries. And so we're really trying to take advantage of our leadership in that respect. And there's a few areas that we find that it's quite resounding when we bring it into an international context. One is, Canada's ranking in terms of open data and the creation of data repositories. I think we're very well respected in that arena. Of course, in the trust index, Canada leads in many measures around trust. On the AI side and emerging technologies, I think there's real recognition about where Canada ranks in terms of research in these arenas. And ultimately, if you look at the intersection of all of these, bridging open data, data is an essential element in our thesis, combining it with trust elements, that's what leads to this notion of responsible ethical AI. And I think Canada can have a real important position in the world stage for that. And I think what we've done in the first phase, the first chapter of our journey together as an innovation community, is pursue a new model for how innovation can take place here in Canada. It's ultimately about a demand-driven model where we bring customers into the framework to really champion the needs around R&D and to specify the challenge lanes that we need to pursue. It's about building consortiums and accelerating sort of development through this co-investment mix that includes multiple actors from different areas of expertise to achieve what no single organization could achieve on its own. And it's really trying to take the outcomes of that and drive the digital adoption by ensuring that we've got an understanding what the market demand looks like and scaling those technologies across that continuum. And I think that collaboration model is really well characterized when we look at this sort of stereotypical sort of framework for how collaborations come together. Again, there's industry leading partners that are really the customer and adopters of this. We have technology lead partners, we have co-development partners, we have post-secondary and research organizations that are part of these consortiums. We have technical service providers that create the conditions for it to really fit in the solution context for the customer. And of course, as a co-investor, we're trying to create the framework by which these collaborations can be pursued and to ensure that there is a way to de-risk the undertaking by providing investment dollars that go alongside those of all the other partners in this consortium. And we've had some success. I think we started with a really modest baseline of members back in 2018. I think we had somewhere around 30, 35 members to start. And that has really ballooned and blossomed over time. We now have a growing community across the country of more than 1,200 members, some of which are represented by big companies like Lululemon and Tech, TELUS, Canfor, MDA, St. Paul's Hospital in Providence, and then lots and lots of startup and scale up technology companies, leading academic institutions. We now have more than 50 academic and research organizations across the country, and lots of nonprofit and ecosystem builders who are part of our journey to kind of build for a more digitally prepared and better Canada. And together we've achieved success in the form of co-invested collaborative projects. We have more than 80 projects that we pursued that has led to industry investments and our investments, which total nearly $400 million. And in particular, we're quite proud of the fact that we've had a real impact on helping SMEs to grow. More than 70% of our investments have gone towards the furtherance of their scaling and their growth. And I think, across the board in terms of our impact, one of the key things that we look at is just how have we been doing in terms of the products and services. And you can see there's more than 150 sort of new products and services being developed through our co-investment portfolio. Lots of SMEs that have subsequently grown and scaled. I think really important is just the potential for new revenue sources as a result of these new products, which amounts to more than $2.5 billion over the next several years. And I think it's actually generated a lot of made in Canada IP that can consequently sort of create the conditions for more successes. And that's what's led to many of our companies started to explore international opportunities and export laneways. And it's really propelled commercial advances in many of the areas that I think we have a really good position here in Canada. Not only AI and machine learning, but pioneering many of the advances in quantum computing, in the areas of genomics, cybersecurity, privacy, and governance. A lot of what we've seen in markets like Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto is in the next generation of data visualization, immersive technologies. Of course, the intersection of 5G, IoT, sensors, and smart devices, and a lot of the monitoring, geospatial hyperspectral imaging that we're seeing now, which is quite important in the environmental projects we're involved with, and the move towards decentralization and blockchain technology. So all of which we're seeing quite prominent in our project investments. Now, what I want to do is just give you a quick snapshot and run through on some examples of where we've invested. As I mentioned, we have more than 80 projects we've invested in, but just to give some highlights of the areas that we've been undertaking. So in health, which has been one of the more pronounced areas of investment, largely because of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and making sure that we could provide solutions to abate that situation. Some examples of projects, the Autism Sharing Initiative is an example of data sharing. It's really about building a global platform for sharing genomics and biomedical information. Wellness.ai is a project that our colleagues at Lululemon are leading, and it's really about using AI in the context of delivering sort of new forms of counseling and wellness therapy using sort of automated systems. And telewound care is a project led by Swift Medical, and it's really about using AI imaging to provide more remote capabilities around the delivery of best-in-class wound care. In the environment side, again, it's using digital technologies with purpose in the areas of protecting our oceans, guarding against illegal fishing. Our mining microbiome project is really about an open data platform across multiple mining organizations to look at how we can eliminate the issues with remediating environmental waste and issues. And then precision crop health is really a project that combines computational biology with areas like robotics, AI, machine learning to really transform how we do agriculture. And then as examples on digital transformation, these are all supply chain related, but it's really using digital technologies to improve and optimize supply chain considerations in the aviation and aerospace industry, in the forestry industry, and then in the food supply chain arena. So maybe at this juncture, what I'll do is I'll just introduce Karen McClure, who's our Chief Investment Officer focused on the technology innovation portfolio, and she can give a reflection of some of our technology leadership projects and what we've learned over the last 4 years. Karen, over to you.
Thanks very much, Bill, and hi everybody. It's nice to see you. Just at a very high level, our technology leadership portfolio, as Bill said, is almost $350 million attracted investment from industry and others over the last 4 years. On an average, that works out to about $5 million per project. As Bill said, most of our investments have been in health, primarily, skewed because of our investments to address the COVID-19 pandemic. About a quarter of the investments are in sustainability and natural resources, and 11% in industrial productivity. When we started, we made smaller investments in our earlier cycle and in our COVID program. For example, in our cycle 2, what we called it, which was 3 years ago, the average size of our projects was about 3.2 million. It grew over time to 6.6 in cycle 3, and now in our last 2 years, our projects have grown to be an average of just over 10 million, with a number of larger projects that are in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 million, with around 6 coming from us. In terms of duration, it ranges from 1 to 3 years, with the average being around 24 to 27 months. And now we have, over 400 organizations actively participating in projects. About half of those are small and medium enterprises, with the other half being comprised of larger industry, research institutions, and universities, as well as public sector and not-for-profit. And as we talk about teams, the team size, as the project size has grown, the team size has also grown in number and complexity. And so over time, we're now around 8 or 9 partners per project, ranging anywhere from 3 to, we've got one project that's over 20 partners. And so quite an evolution over the 4 years, and lots that we've learned. So to the next slide. Thank you. So I just categorize our learnings really in 3 main themes. The first one is, this is a pathway to commercial success. Our mandate is to help Canadian companies scale through the development of commercial and the commercialization and adoption of digital products and services. So, at a high level, success looks like, these companies are generating revenue so that more people can be hired. They'll continue to evolve these products and services, invest in new R&D, and attract private investment. The first step along that journey is developing the new product and then commercializing and evolving it in time. And so commercialization and adoption strategy is a really important part of our evaluation criteria. Our evaluators look for teams to demonstrate commercial know-how, to have an understanding of their target market. And in some markets, the buyers and the users are different. So, really appreciating that, and that buy-in from both is important. The competitive landscape, and having a robust commercial strategy and go-to-market plan. This includes the intellectual property strategy and the data management plan. They go hand in hand with commercial strategy, and considerations around things like cybersecurity and insurance, data sharing, and responsible and ethical use of data are really, really important. So we now require teams to actively engage target customers or distributors in their projects to demonstrate that there is indeed a problem to be solved, that they feel that the solution that's being proposed may be able to solve it, and to de-risk the product market fit without any obligation for procurement. So engagement can take many forms, from advisory roles to actually investment and participation in pilot deployments. In fact, across our portfolio, for every dollar that technology companies are investing, target customers and distributors are investing 50 cents. And so that shows you the kind of commitment that these target customers are making to these projects. And, we really highly recommend that the companies engage their commercial teams, including product managers, in the proposal development as well as in the project once it's selected. So, the most successful teams, when we look at those, are, have that commercial maturity within their organizations, and they learn over time. Where we've seen teams struggle on some selected projects where they don't make it through contracting, or, unfortunately, a few projects have been canceled because they discover they're not on the same page in terms of their expectations once the product has been developed and now they're going to market. So now we're forcing these early and sometimes difficult conversations to happen up front. So where preliminary commercial terms are now part of the proposal and included in the project agreements with a requirement to finalize the commercial agreements during the project. So on the topic of commercialization and adoption, I think there is more that we can do to help companies and support companies on the commercial front. I'm quite interested in hearing what you would find valuable either today or, at a separate time. The second theme is around collaborative innovation, which we've learned means different things to different people, and it's not easy, and it's a new approach for many, and it's not for everyone. So this is really about being part of an ecosystem, of helping to build an ecosystem, of learning from each other and benefiting many, including benefits to Canada and benefits to Canadian. Aligning on a vision, aligning on long-term expectations and understanding the benefits that are expected to be derived by each organization is really, really critical in successful projects. It requires trust between partners, which sometimes takes time to build, because they're really committing to work together both during the product development project and into the commercialization journey. So we all know that innovation is risky. No project ever goes exactly as planned. Things will change. We just don't know what it is that's going to change, and stuff happens. So, the willingness and the ability for these organizations to hold each other accountable, to work through issues and changes that as they arise is really important. And so it just reinforces the benefits that we hear from our members about the multi-party project agreement. Essentially it lays out the expectations and promises that each organization is making to each other, how they'll work together, and the framework for how to deal with things when they go sideways. So it can be really challenging up front. As I said, it's new for many, but the feedback we've received from members has been that it's worth it. And working through these challenges is certainly valued at the beginning of a project. Governance and transparency is really important. And one thing that we've certainly seen and heard from the membership community is that there are huge benefits to having an independent manager that's really there to manage the consortium and the relationships between the organizations, especially when they're dealing with issues, is super important. So we really recommend that teams, engage a strong, I'll call them project manager, but they're a lot more than that, both during the proposal development, during contracting, and throughout the project. Because really what our evaluators look for is they have confidence in the team, that this team has the skills, the talents, and the experiences that are required both during and after the projects, that they're working well together, and they're ready to take on the challenges that they're proposing. The third theme is really around long-term perspective. As I said, we started by making smaller investments with the hope that success would result in follow-on investments and the evolution of those products. That didn't happen as much as we thought it would. And we recognize that it's a lot of work for you. It's a lot of work for our evaluators and a lot of work for us. So in our later cycles, we started to take a different approach. Started to look for bigger, bolder, more ambitious projects that are executed in phases with formal go, no-go gates. These gates act as a formal checkpoint. How are things going? What have we learned? What do we need to do differently? Have market conditions changed, so we need to pivot in any way? And is everybody still all in? And really having those discussions as a team before undertaking the next phase. So not only is that best practice for large R&D projects, it also helps everybody manage their investments, and it's super helpful when starting at a lower TRL as you learn more about the technologies as well. Earlier I talked about the need for the team to align on a vision, their long-term expectations and benefits, what they're expecting to come out of this project, as well as the pathway to commercial success and how important it is, which can be a long journey. And over time, we've also seen the size and the duration of the projects and the team size increase. So when I talk about these commitments, this also has to include us. So going forward, I expect that we'll be selecting fewer, bigger projects that will get done in phases. And we too will make long-term commitments and reallocate our dollars only if the project's unsuccessful for some reason. And just, an interesting stat, when we look back at all of the great ideas that we've received and our evaluation and selection process, we select 5 to 10% of the opportunities that come to us. The best ones, rise to the top. It's also taught us, though, that honest and quick direction on fit and readiness is important and valued. And like you, we want to spend our time supporting you to win. And so as we look forward, that will be our focus, and is really quick no's, and supporting you to win and be successful in securing investment.
So Karen, maybe at this point, did you want to invite some commentary?
Oh, yes, thank you. So maybe I'll just call on Alina from a company called Help Seeker to share her experiences.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm not going to bore you with slides because they won't compete with your beautiful slides. But just 2 seconds about us so you can contextualize my comments. So we focus on social technology innovation to solve some of the complex social challenges that we see in Canada. So everything from domestic violence and homelessness, all caused by pretty inefficient social infrastructure and supply-demand models that just don't exist. And so our project with the Supercluster, there's been 2 in particular, but the most recent one has been the Compass project. So as you were reflecting, Karen, on the learnings, I can definitely attest to the value add of the collaboration. So our partners were obviously Supercluster, Canada Mortgage and Housing Company, because of the focus on homelessness. We had 3 alpha communities, which meant hundreds of stakeholders, everybody from lived experience all the way to social service providers and political level folks. And navigating those relationships has absolutely been part of the value add of bringing a consortium together. And then our academic partners, U of T, has been quite instrumental. So the value to me as an entrepreneur has been in as much as the funding has been very helpful to bring other partners to the table. The process and the rigor to even get through those couple of phases was instrumental, because it taught us what was ahead of us, and it highlighted the problems really early on in the process. So we said, even if we're not successful in this pitch around Compass project, which I'll tell you about in a second, we're gonna be so much better off having gone through the process than just going ahead and building a bunch of stuff that nobody ends up purchasing, because we never did our due diligence on commercialization. So the process itself is super valuable. The other aspect that I found value add has been the rigor on, and I know it sounds crazy, but on the tracking, the monthly tracking of performance, and it's holding you to your commitment, but it's not holding you to a path that may not work. It's actually holding you to a continuous improvement cycle. And so that for us spurred a move to Agile Scrum, for instance. And so by having to have these regular cycles as a startup that's moving in areas that are relatively, not having been done before, there's not really a playbook on it. How do you do social change through technology? It's we talk about it, but we don't have very good how-to manuals. Having this process that we walk through with the Supercluster was really, really key. And then the last one has been the opportunities for getting audiences that we may not have otherwise gotten. So the Compass project is meant to create these hubs of technology supports that are going to connect people to social services, that are going to help with the referral management across organizations and data flows that have never been processed before. So there's lots and lots of unstructured data, messy data. So the ability to bring the U of T, kind of the best in class on ontologies and into this project, that was something that we could only do because the Supercluster was at the table. For us, we were 10 people. We're luckily much bigger than that now, but the Supercluster brand and gives us that in with bodies that we would have never gotten a meeting with. And then, of course, most recently getting invited to actually go be part of international projects. So those are kind of the three takeaways for me on my experience with this. And I'm happy to tell you the ins and outs of if you're considering an application and haven't been through it before, on my experience there too. Happy to touch on anything else too, Karen and Bill. And thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Alina. I think Goddard, you're also on the line. Do you want to share your experiences?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Karen and Bill. So I'm Goddard. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Verge Agriculture. Our transformative purpose is to accelerate the transition to autonomous farming. So we're developing software that helps farmers plan, simulate, and validate the movement of their equipment in the field and execute field operations efficiently. So essentially what we're doing is really simplifying farm planning to reduce decisions that are made in the field so you can accelerate to more autonomous farming in the future. But when people think about autonomous, they're always thinking about self-driving tractors. But apart from the self-driving capability and some of the machine awareness issues, the real problem that farmers face around autonomous need to address topics around how you make decisions, how do you reduce emissions, and how do you continue to improve the long-term value of our soil? And studies have shown that farmers are losing money on every acre they farm. About 95% of revenue goes towards very expensive inputs that are not just expensive in terms of what you're paying for seed, chem, and fertilizer, but also damaging the environment in the long run. So you have a double-edged sword here where a net income crisis is driving a climate crisis, and we wanted to develop a solution that actually addressed this at a farm level. And we knew we couldn't go about doing this by ourselves. So when the idea for the project came along, the Supercluster actually helped us put together a team because being a startup, you don't really have the right connections, nor do you have the knowledge of who else is doing something similar. So, having a membership network within the digital technology Supercluster that we can tap into and see who fits the right role in solving this global problem, we were able to identify teams. And I should say the Supercluster helped us bring this team together. So we've teamed up with Terramera, who's focused on regenerative farming practices, eye-open technologies. They've mastered the use of GIS and digital agriculture through their platform. Quantitech brings focus on food security through controlled environment farming. And then we have professors and brilliant students from the Simon Fraser University that are bringing in the latest advancements in AI and helping us develop our technology through algorithms that they are able to iterate much quicker. So we're developing the world's first interactive planning software for precision agriculture. And recently with what's happening in Ukraine with the war, which is quickly turning into using food and hunger as a weapon of global destruction, we've been able to leverage our partnership with the digital technology Supercluster to deliver a solution that helps Ukrainian farmers to plan their field operations in a very safe manner. And the speed at which we were able to put that solution together and seeing the adoption in Ukraine is, I don't think we could have done that as a company ourselves without the help of the Supercluster and their speed to getting this for us. In terms of the impact it has had to our company, it allows us to focus on growth through market-driven innovation. We're able to quickly iterate and innovate and get to a commercially viable product faster than our competitors. So the impact so far has been immense. We closed our Series A round, bringing in some strategic investors that really saw the validation that the Supercluster put into this complex problem that we are after to solve. And some of the initial versions of our product that has been released now has been, we've been able to attract farmers from around the world, not just Canada. We're looking at US, Brazil, Argentina, the European Union, and Australia. So, we're making global progress here. So not just deep technical progress, but we're also validating the global adoption of our product and also scaling our commercialization strategy. As a company that was new into this 2 years ago, what have we learned? If your mandate is to solve complex problems that have a global impact, then collaboration is key. And the Digital Technology Supercluster provides companies a framework to think about innovation with a collaborative mindset. So rather than building everything yourself and carry risk all along the way, the collaborative projects allow companies to leverage partnerships, evaluate buy versus build decisions and licensing opportunities to get to the same business outcomes. And this de-risks investments, and we get to focus on what is core to our company. So we get to leverage the strength of our partner organizations who are part of this project to move the needle on both economic and sustainability outcomes. So for us, this has been a great experience being part of this project, and we have great plans to continue this collaboration. And happy to help newer companies that are willing to take part in this and share our experiences. So please do reach out to me, and happy to help. Thanks, Karen and Bill.
Thank you, Goddard.
Well, thanks so much to both Alina and Goddard for those remarks. And just to contextualize, I think our membership model has attracted folks from across the country. So we certainly, these are just two stories of many that hopefully can help to inspire the next chapter. Maybe perhaps what I'll do now is sort of switch over and provide a bit of an example of some of the investments we've done in the digital skills and talent development side. And 3 projects here that we've highlighted: the Canadian Tech Talent Accelerator, you'll hear about that in a moment; the Digital Lift project, which is creating a system for rapid reskilling for careers in digital technology; and then Athena Digital Leaders, which was a project really to kind of solve for the underrepresentation that we have in some of the emerging fields like AI and machine learning and data science in general. So maybe what I'll do now is introduce Sydney Goodfellow, who leads our talent and capacity building programs, to maybe share a few of the insights from our experiences.
Thanks so much, Bill. With the talent and capacity side of things, similar to the way that Karen talked about the size and the breadth of projects, we've been really lucky here at the Supercluster to work across about 19 talent-focused projects across 2 calls. So we had a pilot program, which was 8 projects, and then a second call, which is 11 projects. And those are pretty evenly distributed across the 3 pillars that you see here: the pathways to digital jobs, leading digital change, and growing connected communities. But in the kind of relation to COVID-19 and the reskilling that's been required, we've had a fairly strong emphasis on the pathways to digital jobs piece. We still see lots of opportunity for growth in that area, and also moving forward, we'll be adding to our leading and connected communities pillars as well. This portfolio represents about $12.7 million of Supercluster investment, so a lot of leverage there and a lot of support from industry as well. The projects that we're investing in and partnering on range in size from $150,000 feasibility studies all the way up to $15+ million pan-Canadian strategic approaches to the way that we skill and develop talent in Canada. There's a huge range of partners across Canada. We're working with about 130 partners on these projects. And the skills that are being developed represent some high growth and in-demand areas, like Bill mentioned, AI and machine learning and data science, as well as things like women in entrepreneurship and angel investing, as well as quantum computing, IT, cloud computing, really driven by what the needs of industry are, and then a range of levels from literacy up to leadership. So it's a pretty broad portfolio, and working across this range of projects and with these partners has really helped us to learn a great deal. So if we want to go to the next slide, I'll talk about just a couple of our lessons. And we have had a lot, and we continue to learn a lot in this space. It is a learning space. So, we really take everything as an opportunity to refine and change how we're doing things. to really meet the needs of our ecosystem in terms of talent. So I'll just talk about 4 of the big lessons that we learned, and happy to unpack any of these as well in future conversations. But really, these 4 here represent some of these, like I said, these bigger picture lessons. So with the focus on people, when we started the capacity building program at the Supercluster, we knew that there was going to be a focus on people and talent, and we just didn't know how big that opportunity was. And so part of these projects that we're working on, and the consultations and partnerships that we have in the community, and as well COVID and the acceleration of change due to digital transformation, all of these have led us to really see that the opportunity and talent is massive. As well, it is a strategic priority for the Supercluster, as you know, we're looking to build teams that are creating world-leading innovations. Karen talked about the importance of a strong team, and behind every team, behind every company, every community that is successful, it's the people. It's all the people on this call and in our community that we get to work with day to day, and ensuring that these communities and these ecosystems have the skill set and the mindset and the diversity of talent and the access to skilling in order to be successful in that way. So we both see a huge opportunity moving forward, as well as a huge strategic need for workforce development, particularly in the area of digital. But as we move into a clean economy, and we talk about health, and we talk about globalization, I think there's just opportunities across the board. And so by focusing on people, we are able to deliver and accelerate some of the other goals that we're working on as well around innovation and technology development. Strategic partnerships has been really an evolution for us. We've always worked with strategic partners, but really what we see here is an opportunity to collaborate even more with our community in ways that get beyond traditional kind of call for projects, come to us with solutions, and really being able to create these kind of long-term relationships where we have values alignment and are able to go and solve challenges together that we might not have unearthed on our own. And you know, this is something we're thinking a lot about lately, and there will be more to come on the direction that we go on this. And this is also something that we're looking for kind of consultation on as well, and we can discuss later of how do we better work with partners in the ecosystem. We know here in Canada, and I'll talk about this in the next lesson learned as well, but we know here in Canada that we have some of the strongest training and development organizations in the world. We're one of the most highly educated nations. And so how can we tap those partnerships and create things together that are greater than the sum of their parts? Bold and global, you know, this again was a lesson where early on we were really focused on building talent at the community level, which we're still, of course, doing it very much so. But really what we see, especially through COVID and some of the changes that are happening, talent and workforce development is a global challenge. It's something that as we look beyond our borders, we see around the world as a major area of need. And as I mentioned, with the strategic partnerships, we have a huge amount of leadership that's already working on this in Canada. So if we can take and find and experiment and test and grow things here, those can have an opportunity to make an impact around the world as well. And people can look to Canada really as a place to grow innovation and learning and development and talent and digital workforce development. So I think there's a huge area of growth and opportunity there that we can head while still making impact at the local and community level as well. Systems level innovation, you know, again, really looking at creating an impact at that individual or community level, but then also zooming out and trying to understand what this can mean. So as we talk about the acceleration of change, as we talk about, you know, just the way the world is heading, we don't necessarily want to keep doing things the way that they've always been done. So as we're making these experiments in talent development and trying to look at what works and what can happen a little bit differently, what can we learn from that, share with others within the ecosystem and within our partnerships, so that we're changing the way that talent development and workforce development happens at a macro level, not just making those individual impacts. And we can share those learnings and help kind of raise the tide across the board. As well, you know, something that we see across is the systemic barriers that some face to accessing and participating and benefiting from the digital economy. You know, things like connectivity, as well as systemic racism and some of the things that are really critical to making sure that we're able to develop the workforce. So these are areas that we're going to continue to focus on and prioritize and emphasize as well. So those are just a couple of the lessons learned. There's lots more, like I said, but now I wanted to quickly call upon, I believe Julia Blackburn is in the audience. She's the CEO of NPower, which is leading the Canadian Tech Talent Accelerator project. So Julia, over to you if you'd like to say a few words.
Thanks. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Bill. First, I'd also just like to acknowledge Empower Canada's COO is also here on the call today, Andrew Redden, who is really the lead for the project at Empower Canada. So just briefly, Empower Canada, we are actually a charitable organization. And what we do is launch underserved youth and adults into meaningful and sustainable careers in technology. So we do this pretty much through classic workforce development. We provide free in-demand digital and professional skills training programs, and then we match those program graduates with employers who are looking to fill junior IT roles. So we prioritize serving job seekers from very diverse communities, including Indigenous communities, Black communities, people of color, 2S LGBTQ+ participants, women and gender diverse individuals, people with disabilities, and newcomers. So diversity and economic development are very much essential elements of our workforce development model. To date, more than 80% of our graduates, over 4,100, have either secured employment or they're enrolled in post-secondary education within 6 months of completing the training. So they tend to go into jobs that are really those junior level in-demand tech jobs that include positions such as a help desk analyst, a QA specialist, information security analyst, with lots of our industry leaders, and our employment partners such as Accenture, CGI, CIBC, Deloitte, IBM, RBC, SoftChoice, TD, TELUS, just to name a few of the hundreds of employers that we work with. And we're placing these participants not just in traditional tech jobs that you would think IBM tech job, but really even with the banks, we're looking at increasing number of roles that are really tech enabled across all types of industries: retail, manufacturing, education, health, telemedicine. The Canadian Tech Talent Accelerator is delivered in partnership with, of course, the Digital Technology Supercluster, but also the government of BC, Microsoft Canada, and us here at Empower Canada. So from January of 2021 going forward through March 2024, we'll be enrolling in the Empower program 3,900 job seekers all across Canada. Collectively, the organizations that are collaborating that I just mentioned will be investing approximately $15.5 million to support this work, with, of course, the government of BC's funding exclusively supporting up to 2,000 BC residents. So the project has really allowed us with Microsoft to achieve some really great shared impact at scale. We've been able to really accelerate our expansion of the program, right? By working together to really enrich our offerings, because Microsoft has shared their innovative curriculum and their online skills offerings with us, and in addition have helped us source job opportunities for our program alumni among Microsoft's industry partners. So it's very much, I know the word collaboration has been used here a lot today. It's really kind of what we have always been about, and certainly with this Canadian Tech Talent Accelerator project, it has even deepened those collaborations, expanded those collaborations, and therefore allowed us to scale at a much more rapid rate. So it's really, I think we talk is certainly in our field and certainly in the nonprofit world about these types of partnerships a lot, but I think this is for us certainly a great example of one that's really, really worked, because we had the digital technology supercluster playing a really central role in, convening these stakeholders across the sectors to share best practices, access resources, you really, build the capacity needed to replicate and scale our model across Canada. As I mentioned, we've had Microsoft, their industry expertise as a technology leader, really providing us that best-in-class curriculum to equip our job seekers with the marketable skills that they need, and then also helping them connect the project to their ecosystem of businesses that need that tech talent. The government of BC has really been amazing and really played a transformative role in expanding our impact in their province, beyond just the large urban centers where we tend to have our hubs, but also connect us with Indigenous job seekers, smaller communities, rural areas, where we've been able to, not only bring the virtual skill training that we provide, but also those remote work opportunities that we can take with us as we grow across BC. So, in short, it is all about collaboration in terms of the success and the scalability of our project. And I think that the innovation of these cross-sectoral collaborations has really enabled us to achieve a far greater impact by working together with this group than we would have been able to, any of us really, to be able to have done individually.
Thank you so much, Julia. We're so happy to be working with NPower and Microsoft and Blueprint in the province on this project. Thanks. Back
yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to mention Blueprint. I'm so sorry. Thank you. They are our evaluation partner on the project, because we really think it's just so important to have that, external evaluation element. And so, thank you. I missed that. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Julia and Sydney. We're sort of at the point where I think I'm going to take down the screen for a moment. We've shared a lot on this presentation, and I'd like to see if there were any questions that people had along the way before we get to part 2 of the agenda, which is to look forward. So I know, Annika, you've been monitoring the chat. Are there any questions that have arisen? And for all of you in the audience who do have questions, just use the raise hand function and we can make sure that we get to you if you have any questions or comments about the first phase of our journey together. And I'll just turn to Annika right now. Is there anything in the chat?
There's nothing in the chat. I see Jill Farber, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could just tell us how to get in touch. I'm hearing all these unbelievable opportunities around vulnerable populations, and I'm the executive director of Autism Speaks Canada, and wondering how we can sort of examine if we could be a collaborator on some of these job seeker initiative.
Thanks for that question. So what we can do is, Sydney, maybe you can put your email address in the chat, and we do have a call for partners in that arena. So that might be a good way to get you involved with us on that. So thanks for the question. Any other questions at this point before we move to the second chapter? Are we clear to go, Annika?
There's a question in the chat. Assuming you get extended, what are your thoughts about submitting follow-up projects with the same consortium, for example, in a different chronic disease use case? Is this something that you would consider?
Why don't I ask Karen to tackle that question? Karen?
Yeah, I think it's always something that's worth consideration. Success breeds success. And so we'd be quite interested in exploring that. It all depends on what else is going on, but always looking to invest more in successful projects.
Thanks, Karen. And then how does the startup engage with the supercluster?
That's a good question. And I'll start, but maybe what I'll do is I'll ask if anyone in our community who's a startup would like to also weigh in on the answer. Every startup has a journey to try to find market fit with what they're doing. And I think startups get involved with us simply by being part of conversations like this, meeting all sorts of different actors that can help to propel your growth. It's about finding projects that you might actually be able to contribute your expertise to. And part of that is just having an understanding of the areas that you're most interested in, and then working through sort of with us and maybe our member directory to kind of examine who are the possible customers and collaborators for a project that you might undertake. The actual project selection mechanism, there's lots and lots of documentation we have there, but the shortcut on that is, we try to look for best fit projects that demonstrate that the collaboration team can work very well together to build a product or solution that couldn't have been done by any single organization on its own, and that it really does have a commercial impact and a customer on the end point of that. So there's a lot to that, but do I have anyone who would like to? I think we had a few folks who were with us earlier that could provide a perspective. I think Alina did earlier. Anyone else who has a startup who's sort of benefited from being part of the Supercluster would like to offer an opinion? Just unmute yourself and share your perspective. Okay, we have tied tongues there. Alina, maybe I can call on you if you can kind of provide a perspective.
Oh, I think I referenced some of the obvious things. Maybe I'll reference some of the less obvious things, like the actual application process, just because it seemed like there was a couple of questions about that. So I highly encourage you to stalk the Supercluster's community members page, because that's where you can see a lot of the organizations and what they're up to. And to really, when Bill or Karen say, hey, I think you should meet with so-and-so, you should always take that meeting, because there's always a value add there as well. And as a startup, you are just not as aware of what everybody else is working on. So figuring out like your niche in this space is so essential. So the more meetings you have, the better off I think we're all going to be as a result. But in terms of the process itself as well, create it as an epic, and if you're using Jira or whatever system you use, it because it's actually a very involved process as well. So it almost feels like a round, like a raise, if you will. That's how I would describe the process. But as a result, you're really ready for rounds later on, because it's a very, very similar process. It's just that you're doing a round with a bunch of people at the same time, because you're working as a consortium. So it's a boot camp, I would say, for a startup if you make it through those rounds. But hopefully that's kind of what you were getting at, Bill, for experience, but maybe I didn't hit it.
Yeah, no, that's great, Alina.
Okay.
And maybe we'll just turn and see if there's more questions. I see.
Do you see?
Serbi?
Yeah.
I know, it's such a difficult name, and
I
I
apologize.
honestly should take that name off, and I will make you guys laugh the entire way, because that is the legal name. And someone said, just take that name off, because I go by Serbi. It is an interesting world of Canadian innovation right now, and where I've been told to go and find investment abroad, and I have refused up to this point, because I'm trying to build a curriculum-based assessment tool for Canadian purposes. So you can see, right, where I would be very controversial. It's okay, I can go to and trust me, I love all of them. I love Landon. I've met with the YC Combinator. I mean, I've met with all of them, and we've gotten along well. However, where do I assess my Canadian investment in a tool with foreign investment?
I'm wondering, Sydney, do you want to try to answer Serbi's question?
Yeah, so I think Thanks for your question, Serbi. I think, one of the areas that we're going to be looking at is understanding, in the past, we've invested mostly in skills training itself. So we refer to training for technology rather than technology for training. But one of the areas that we are looking at growing and expanding into is that technology for training side of things. So if you want to follow up with me, I did put my email in the chat there if you want to send me a quick note, and happy to chat through that with you.
Great, thanks. And I know there's a number of other questions in the chat. One of the things that I will reflect on and learning in the first phase, when we had several hundred members, it was far easier to build connections and to establish collaborations, introduce people to one another. But the scaling piece is something that we need to work on in the second phase. When we have 1,200 organizations, it becomes almost impossible to know everyone very well. So, we are a digital supercluster, so we may call upon you to help us build some digital tech in order to kind of create some matching algorithms or find ways for people to find each other, or to sponsor challenges or problem areas or types of projects that you guys want to undertake. So that's all on the table for those that want to consider. And I see a number of questions that deal with how do you collaborate, how do I get started and whatnot. And I think we do have a member portal, but I will confess that it is not the most utilized asset in our repertoire. It's something that we'd like to actually make work much better for our member community. So that's a couple of things there. Now, I'm just in the interest of time going to maybe look at the questions afterwards, come back to them if we have time at the end of the session. And if not, then we'll be sure to kind of reach out and respond to some of them in due course. So what I'd like to do now is maybe shift to the second portion of this event, and that's really to talk about what's the go forward for us. So I'll go back to sharing screen for a moment, and what I'll do is I'll just do a quick summation of what we're calling phase 2. There's some language here that I just want to bring everybody up to speed on so that we're kind of speaking the same language. As I mentioned at the outset, one of the real benefits in the work that we've done collectively, not just our supercluster, but across all clusters across the country, is that there's been recognition that there has been real success and there has been an impact around scaling around areas like driving impactful commercialization, scaling small, mid-sized companies, and building strong innovation ecosystems. I think that the intent of the next phase, what we're calling phase 2, is to really build on the momentum and in some respects, take that momentum and raise the level of ambition in the collaborations that we would invest in. And that also has an added lens, and I'll go into a bit more detail, is around this notion of what are the national priorities? What is it in Canada that we are seeking to be able to do? And that leads to many conversations in sort of policy circles around missions and objectives that kind of tie multiplicity of players to try to solve for real world problems. So with that, here are some key considerations for framing our next phase. And again, our objective in this conversation is to get your input, get some perspectives on some of the things that we should be looking at. So the first of all, we do have momentum. We've got lots of projects that we've invested in, and we've clearly see some intersection points on what's been developed, some of the IP that's underlying it, as well as some of the new capabilities that we can carry forward. The second area is, as I mentioned, aligning with Canada's overarching priorities, and that's in the form of missions, but not only missions, but how do we have more global impact? And the other consideration is, as you can see, for those of you who are participating in more than one cluster, that there are some cross-cluster collaboration opportunities, whether it's in the AI space with our Scale AI colleagues in Montreal, or in the ocean space with our Ocean Supercluster, or in the agriculture space with the Protein Supercluster, or even in the advanced manufacturing side with the NGen Supercluster. There's lots of opportunity to do projects that could actually cater to multiple clusters simultaneously. So ultimately, the question is, what are the strategic areas in which we should focus? And maybe just to provide a bit of a framework, I'm gonna put forth a starting point for our conversation. Rather than a blank sheet of paper exercise, I think what we're gonna do is just share with you what we've heard so far from the many stakeholders that we've reached out to over the last 6 months. And so this is a starting point for investment themes and areas of focus. We're going to dig into each one of these in more detail, but let me just give you a quick snapshot. On the bottom, you see two bars that are really sort of national priorities. It's greening the economy, enhancing supply chain resiliency. We know those are important attributes of what Canada and the government is looking for. But within that, there are very specific areas that we've been building some capabilities around. So one of them is in critical minerals in the mining space. You know, that there is an opportunity to significantly increase the supply of Canadian minerals to grow the green and digital economy. We've already made a lot of investments in health and wellness. So, you know, there's a possible theme there that the goal is to continue to build technology advancements to expand access, improve outcomes, and ultimately enhance the sustainability of healthcare in Canada. In the third area is this notion of digital decarbonization, and that wraps around this idea of sustainability, whether it's supply chain or whether it's sort of looking at high emitting industries or strategic industries. It's really about how can we help to kind of advance the productivity of industry digitally, while at the same time kind of solving some of the carbonization issues. And of course, the area of talent and capacity, which we just spoke about, the goal in developing skills and opportunities for Canadians in the digital economy. So that's sort of the broad frame I want to start with. And then maybe what I'll do is I'll ask Karen to unpack each of the first three columns in a bit more detail. And how we're going to do this is, as we unpack them, it's going to give some examples, some areas that we're going to look at. But we'd invite you to just contemplate the questions that we'll put up at the end of each of these. And we'll again ask you to participate either in the chat or by raising your hand, and we'll conduct about a Q&A session for about 15 minutes on each one of these topics for the course of the next hour. So Karen, maybe I'll get you to unmute and talk a little bit about the first column.
Thanks very much, Bill. So when we think about critical minerals and how important they are to our future economy, there's been three areas that we've identified as potential opportunities. The first one is around low impact exploration. So very focused on mining and things like using AI enhanced geospatial technologies to identify, select, and de-risk the optimal locations for resource development. The second opportunity is around efficient extraction of those minerals. So we're, trying to remove the supply chain and knowledge barriers to help manage facilities, assets, and resources, and empowering people with digital insights. The third area that's arisen for opportunities in this space is sustainable refining of minerals. So taking a data-driven approach to purify and refine so that it minimizes waste, optimizes yield, and delivers low carbon mineral supply chain. So just think about that for a few seconds, minutes, and maybe we'll go to the next page and pose some questions for you in no particular order, and we're not going to go one at a time. But before we go, I don't think John Steen's on the line, but if there's anybody in the mining sector that wants to just comment as to how this resonates with you, that would be welcome. So Elizabeth, I see that you have a comment there. Do you want to comment?
Sure. Yeah, just curious. I know you talked a little bit about partnerships, or that was a key theme of the sort of last section of this. But with Foresight having run a number of mining challenges and sourcing innovations and AI and other automation across the mining sector in Canada, I'm curious what the strategy on partnerships is going to be with Mining Association of British Columbia, Canadian Mining Association, and some other folks who are well established in this space.
Ian or Bill, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, I can start here. So Elizabeth, thanks for that question. We've had lots of conversations with the mining associations and CIMI, and of course, it's always welcome to work with Foresight and many of your portfolio companies I think the nature of it has been more to look at where the challenge opportunities have been. And that's what's actually helped inform what Karen had just presented in terms of some of the priority areas. I think in the longer term question about, what would be the partnership model more formally with some of these organizations, I think it's because our remit has traditionally been about investing in collaborations on the R&D front. It hasn't made as much of the room around investing in, downstream sort of organizations or partnerships around that, except in the areas of talent development, which has been our focal point around capacity building. Now, having said that, we're certainly welcome to new ideas. And maybe when we talk about that in the context of the next phase, if there's some areas that you think we could partner on in terms of our investment thesis, we're certainly open to exploring that with you.
Yeah, would love to just share some notes and conversations we've had with different provincial as well as federal government partners on the area of energy mining and low carbon innovation, and so would love to maybe take that offline.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a similar question about how we're collaborating with the Ministry of Energy and Mines on this. So I think it's similar, right? Similar answer.
Yeah, I think that one is, and I can't see the question because I'm just
Okay.
have the screen here. Is that the ministry in BC?
It's not clear.
Okay, I think it is the Ministry of Energy and Mines in BC. Yeah. So the province of BC, and I'm assuming the question did not come from a representative from the government of BC, is that right?
It did.
If it did, then I
Yes.
think we have lots of opportunity to work with you. I think in the past, and certainly in the first chapter, the province of BC was a member and continues to be a founding member of the Supercluster. The laneways for actual active participation in projects, though, has been more difficult to try to carve out. And I think in the areas of mining in particular, areas like verifiable credentials, around environmental assessments, around sort of merging and fusing data that is provided by the regulatory arenas, as well as permitting and all those sorts of things can be brought to bear to help in the mining sector. And I think if we can find a case to bring those actors together, I think we can probably have very large scale opportunities by which to kind of further projects.
Yeah. There's another question here about who is leading the critical minerals effort from Andrew. And I will just say that nobody's in the lead role right now. And so, these are really hypotheses around where we believe that investment is required and can be attracted to solve big problems, and not yet at the stage where we're seeking proposals for consortiums to come forward, but certainly open to understanding who might be interested in investing in these kinds of things so that we can further the thesis or refine it.
And then I see Kirsten Sutton has her hand raised.
Yeah, hi, thanks. And as always, so inspiring to hear what's going on in the Supercluster. Thanks for organizing this for us. I have a question. I don't know a thing about critical minerals, so I hope I'm not diverging too far from what you wanted, but a general question on where we might want to invest. I think we learned a lot during the pandemic about supply chain for sure. And so there's a lot of things like that, but more on how we become more independent. I think in BC, we really felt it for 3 weeks when nothing could get to us, after the floods and stuff like that. Is there any possibility for looking at types of opportunities that really help Canada be more self-sufficient under, another crisis that we might face? So I'm curious about that.
Do you want me to answer that?
You're nodding your head. So
and not
Okay.
just from a supply chain perspective, but I really mean from an overall, like if we were cut off again from the entire world, how might we, could we have made our own vaccines? And again, just all along the road there.
It's a great question, Kirsten. And I think that kind of talks to the bigger sort of resiliency, sort of what are some of the vulnerabilities that we have that we could shore up through digital technologies or innovations across any sort of domain. That category was something that we kind of looked at as maybe would have been a fifth column around sort of a bigger sort of industrial digitization. But maybe, that's good input to say, is there room for us to have an investment thesis that pertains to where we have supply chain shocks or other vulnerabilities? I know we've explored in the transportation sector, and we'll get to that in the decarbonization portion of this discussion. Well, we looked at that not only from the standpoint of, if you've created efficiencies in it, can you do it with the design of resiliency? Can you do it with the design of sort of forward planning, analytics, and sort of backup scenarios that are necessary in that? And I know, there's lots of activities being undertaken across the sectors, like, YVR is doing a lot of things on that. I anticipate the banking and sectors like you're involved with, Kirsten, are doing the same. And the entire transportation network, including conversations we're having with Transport Canada, it's front and center for them. So thank you for that input. Maybe that's worth adding to our list.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions in the chat or hands up.
Well, now that everyone has an opportunity to see how this flows, should we move to the next one?
Let's do that. There are some comments and some unrelated questions that we'll address later on or offline to maintain the flow that we have here. Okay, so the next area is continued opportunities in health and wellness. The overarching themes that we've heard here in terms of opportunities for digital development is digital tools that will help improve access. So by integrating digital health tools and introducing new models of care that can also advance health equity. So, we've seen quite a revolution around virtual care and different, experimentation around new models of care. And so I see continued interest in this area. Another area that's been identified and again builds off of our past experience are digital tools that will improve outcomes. So diagnostics and treatments that will help clinicians and improve patient outcomes. So whether that be, in accelerating drug discovery or AI-enabled tools in radiology or in laboratory medicine or in treatment. So Bill talked about the Autism Sharing Initiative. That's one of their mandates, is to enable that. There will be others. So outcome improvement. And then the last pillar here is around addressing the sustainability of our healthcare system by investing in trusted data sharing, interoperability, and digital literacy that are crucial for the adoption of these critical health, digital health solutions, and also help address some of the health human resources challenges that are currently being faced. So improving access, improving outcomes, and addressing sustainability. Perhaps Rob Fraser, I can call on you to just to comment on how that resonates with you.
Morning, everybody. Thank you so much for including me in this discussion, and again, really excited about phase 2 of the digital supercluster. This is an obvious need, and we're seeing more and more pressures on our healthcare system, especially after all the stresses that COVID has created. Our healthcare system was already underpowered, and now it looks like we're going to be aging out in a lot of areas and burning out in other areas. And so I think we need to really look at this very carefully. And I think there was a few, and you highlighted a couple of them, key areas that were really challenged during the COVID, like the data sharing, like access to data. All of our data tends to be in silos across the country and under provincial or even, down to the physician jurisdictions. And so accessing that information is a huge challenge. And I think, we started a really exciting project employing blockchain technology that gives each individual control of their data. And we're working with that autism initiative, the ASI, and the Autism Sharing Initiative, so that individuals can control how their data is being used in various circumstances rather than leaving it to institutions. So I think this democratization of data is something where Canada could really take a huge lead. around the opportunity of maintaining health, I think is also key. Putting control of giving individuals control of their own health also takes stress off our healthcare system. And I think you made that in your second point, that key of giving people the knowledge, that knowledge transfer, so that you really understand what's going on in your health, but doing it earlier so that you can make changes before a disease really manifests itself. I think that's going to be a huge way that Canada can really lead the world. And maybe this is through partnerships with industry across the board, where, they have a lot to gain to have their workers healthier longer and not caught up in chronic illnesses. And we know for a fact that 80% of all chronic illnesses, which eat up most of our healthcare dollars, are defensible and in many cases avoidable. So if we can empower individuals to take control of their health and give them the information they need along those lines of controlling their own data, I think we've got a winning combination. So really excited, and I'm very pleased to see that we're going to focus on accessibility issues. We learned too during the pandemic how many underserved populations there are, and it's been a real eye-opener, I think, for all Canadians. And we do have to do better, and the digital world really does enable a lot of those opportunities.
Thank you so much, Rob. Are there any other suggestions? I see a couple of comments to reinforce what you said, Rob. Any other questions, input, feedback for us for consideration?
I'll have one comment on this one. We were involved in a mental health and addictions project in Calgary, and folks in the prototyping came up with, of course, an app. And one of the due diligence parts of the process was to look at mental health apps and wellness apps, etc. There was a recent inventory done that showed that there's currently 40,000 mental health and well-being apps targeting Canadians. And so, and not all of them have been created or maintained to certain standards. None of them have been classified on which populations they work best. So it's more of a, how can we get choosier about what's actually missing, and starting to get more discerning about what's next would be, I don't know, I'm sure it's part of the rainforest model, where we just, certain ones need to die and so then the good ones stick around. But how do we do that better, and what can this Supercluster's contribution be to further the field in a strategic way and in a game-changing way too? Because out of 40,000, how do you know where this one fits? So it just made me think of that to share.
Yeah, thanks. Just as a thought provoker, Alina, there are some international jurisdictions that are developing standards and certifications around apps to, help people be able to choose the one that is most appropriate for them, and or have their clinician, recommend some for them. So potentially that's something that is desired.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How do these app resources figure into the patient's pathway to health, and how do we create the recommendations to include these digitized? It's almost like a new service model. The app served health and wellness, which of course is a whole different dimension. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for your comments around, the positioning of health around the 5 Ps: prevention, prediction, personalized, precision, and participative. So interesting that you heard that at an international forum last week, and new ways of describing and framing some of the opportunities. So thank you. Another comment around digital health and really capitalizing on those investments also depends on digital transformations in our healthcare systems. And I would add to that, digital on its own sometimes can address the whole problem. And so, working with our policy partners, on policy levers, working with governments to actually procure some of the solutions once they're invested in. Those are all things that we've heard from our members and our communities as to, companion efforts that need to be in place in order for digital health to really make a difference.
I see Val, you have your hand raised.
I do, and Karen said a lot of the things that I was going to say. So thank you, Karen. I agree. It's like, working at Providence Healthcare as well as Providence Healthcare Ventures, you see both sides of the perspective and how important it is to have all the people at the table that can make those decisions. So when you're co-developing solutions together, which is great because you're building something user wants and hopefully you can commercialize it outside, but it's also about the policies that Karen, you alluded to, and others mentioned too. So if we can just push past that, we've all been trying in our own ways to push that needle or push the envelope. And I think there's still more work to be done there. And I do also want to just acknowledge Supercluster and our partners. We've learned a lot. We found a way to work with industry. It sometimes has been painful and sometimes very exciting. But in the long run, it's all good. So thank you.
Thanks, Val. I'm having problems seeing the chat, Annika, so if there's any other questions or comments.
Yeah, Reed, did you want to unmute?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think some potential areas of investment opportunity is, like, you look at what's happening in the States and just kind of North America in general. Canada's starting to follow suit, but mental health apps are starting to become quite significant, especially with the pandemic and kind of the fallout of that, because we're just starting to experience some of those pieces, and a lot of folks are going to really start feeling the economic hurt from that in the next couple of years, and where that kind of comes in. So a lot of those pieces I look kind of even just broadly into mental health fields and how do we attract kind of for that as a potential investment opportunity. So I guess encouraging those demand driven investments you can derive a bunch of different strategies from that. But I look at some key pieces. I'm just wondering and kind of highlighting community needs and different things like that, but also just kind of just broadly, because this is it's been like an all-time high. Clinicians and folks like that and counselors have always been like kind of steadily busy, but this over the duration of the pandemic, obviously there's been a skyrocket of those kind of folks reaching out for support during the isolation and all these other periods. Forbes just released an article just not too long ago that there's been $1.2 billion invested into mental health technology companies and different things like that. So I look at these pieces and, that's something that I think the digital technology supercluster should be really focusing in on so that we can kind of follow suit and keep up with that. And, Canada has always set the bar for health. I mean, not necessarily in capacity and delivery, because it's definitely strained, but finding those sources and keeping on top of those things and resources, I think, can be really, really huge, and it should be a priority. And just looking at ambitiously, like there's a lot of different routes that we can take for those pieces, but I think really, really honing in and focusing on that particular kind of tech within health and wellness, because those are the pieces that are really going to drive the gears, so to speak, of just healthcare in general, especially when we experience the fallout of what's supposed to come with the pandemic and how it's affected families and individuals especially.
Great, thank you so much. Just a question for you, Reed. When you see this, do you see mental health? Because our intention was that, it encompasses all aspects of health, physical, mental, spiritual, yes, in some cases. And others say it seems to be missing. And so just wondering what your first impression was.
Yeah, I think it seems to be missing, because I find those pieces, like the heart and mind affects everything else, honestly. So you look at those pieces, mental health really can influence someone's physical health as well. So some of those pieces, that overall health and wellness piece, it all starts with the mind. So I find that if that's not in check, a lot of everything else starts to fall apart. It's kind of the mechanism of those pieces. And I would imagine that, there's a lot of different cultural aspects that I would think that kind of play into that as well. And just for us as Canadians, we've always kind of been there for one another and neighbors and different things like that. And when we don't have the resources and the supplements to be able to kind of support folks going through different processes and phases in their life and kind of supporting even just day-to-day emotions, different things like that, I really think some of those pieces, and it does definitely feel like those pieces are missing. And on that side of things, I mean, digital health and wellness is a very broad kind of encompassing kind of topic. So breaking those things down, for me, I kind of think of like 4 pillars of being. It's, the heart, the mind, the body, and spirit. And there's all those pieces that kind of come with that. There's some kind of woke terminology in there as well. But I think for me, it really starts with the hearts and minds of people. And I think if we really don't focus on those pieces, we can kind of lose sight of everything else. And the rest of the cogs in the machine start to fall apart as well.
Yeah. Just before we move on to the next topic, there's comments from Eric Sutherland. Thank you about leveraging standards. I refer to the great work that Eric and the team did on the Pan-Canadian Health Data Strategy, and all of the technology is not necessarily the barrier, but there are great things in the technology ecosystem that can be leveraged, along with some of the policy work that needs to be done to advance this. So thank you for that. And I do think that we could help be an amplifier there. And I'm just going to some of the other comments.
I think we've covered most of the questions, Karen.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic then, which is digital decarbonization. It's a bit of a tongue twister. So again, when we hear folks talk about this area of opportunity, 3 things rise to the top. Clean, connected buildings. And so technology that automates, streamlines, and improves the way we buy, build, and manage buildings and infrastructure. I think that covers both new buildings as well as existing buildings and retrofitting existing buildings. The second area is one that Goddard spoke to, which is around regenerative forestry and farming. And so how do you integrate sensor platforms to help us monitor and adapt the impact of climate change, predict changes, and improve the planning and production of forestry and farming. And the third area that's risen to the top is around trade and transport. So going to the conversation earlier that we had about supply chain and transportation, digital technologies that will coordinate and shorten supply chains, build resiliency, and predict shocks, whether they be through natural disaster or other interrupters, and alleviate the bottlenecks so that we don't have those 3 weeks where we don't know where our stuff is how our stuff is going to get through. So think about that for a few seconds, and perhaps I can call on Jonathan McIntyre from iOpenTech to just give your perceptions and how this resonates with you.
Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here. I think one of the things that we found, we're one of the partners that Supercluster managed to pair up with Goddard and his team. And as a result, we have been working quite hard in the whole area of decarbonization in the agriculture sector. And a lot of it actually ties in to what we're talking about for healthcare. So data silos are a big problem in the ag sector, and trust. So much like patients want their data to be safe, farmers want their data to be their data, and so there's a lot of overlap there. We've also found that in dealing with the small vertical farming opportunities with one of our partners, Quantotech, that again, the interest in food security, particularly since those farms are local, has become really, really important. And sort of as we track the bigger localities of sort of where the data is grown, we actually tie into the healthcare side, and making sure I'm working with Fraser Health out here in the Valley, and we're trying to overlap the access to food the ability to track healthy eating, and whether the location of healthy food can impact the ability to monitor obesity and BMI and that kind of thing. So we track it. It kind of falls from tracking the data in the field, where we're trying to monitor using devices, come up with those types of information where we understand soil carbon and we can monitor it, pushing that through to being able to map it and track it and make it accessible through data anonymization to researchers to do better analysis of that data, while leveraging the farmers, the experts in their fields, so to speak, and then making that data accessible outside of the silos to others to make better decisions. And much of what we found is that we didn't know what we didn't know when we started. And so phase one is what has been a very important learning experience, but the phase two, where we can start to commercialize and build on some of this, is really important. So the way you're looking at it, I think is significant in helping our team, but I would expect other teams as well to move into world-leading opportunities. One of the things that came out of it is we're doing change detection of imagery to help us identify what's happening in fields, field boundaries. Well, we kind of thought, why can't we identify ordnance in the Ukraine to help the farmers better protect themselves, but also optimize the use of their fields. Goddard talked about the fertilizer, the fuel, and the feed or the seed as being important. But I mean, in this case, optimizing those, but living through it is also a pretty key part. And as we look into other parts of the world, war plays a huge or has a huge impact in agriculture, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those insights, Jonathan. Chris Rampersand, are you on the line? Do you want to share some insights from Earth Daily's perspectives?
Sure. Hi, I'm here. Just getting my screen working. Is my video working? Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. Yeah, first off, thanks a lot, Karen and Bill. It's been a real honor to work with the Supercluster. It's been really helpful for our organization at Earth Daily Analytics to grow. Tying to what Jonathan and Goddard were saying, the initiatives that they're doing are very helpful for the agriculture industry, and indirectly, or I should say directly, it's helping with carbon sequestration. And one of the things that we're doing is we're saying, okay, there's these great practices that are happening throughout the Supercluster with iOpenTech and Verge, but how do we scale that up to a global level? And so it's within Canada where we're using these practices like regenerative agriculture, which is now teaching farmers to use different practices like till versus no-till. If you don't till your lands, you can then sequester more carbon, but if you till the land, you release that carbon, and that's, again, that contributes to climate change. And so what we're doing at Earth Daily is using satellites to image the entire Earth's land mass and using that to see what's happening on the ground. And so we can directly see those processes that Jonathan and Goddard are talking about when you use nutrients in your field, when you're growing crops, what's actually happening, we can see that. And so this allows us to both measure the carbon sequestration and then work with government agencies as we move towards a world where it's not just voluntary carbon credits that companies are proceeding to do. Like Google and Apple, they currently use voluntary carbon credits where they work with companies. But as we see over time, we're moving towards government mandated and more localized and industry specific carbon neutral initiatives. And so we can use satellite imagery to help with creating a verifiable, a measurable way to see how much carbon is being sequestered from a variety of applications. So agriculture is a great one. You can use, nowadays there's incentives in some places for using cover crops, essentially not getting rid of all the crops in the winter season where you have a warmer climate. You can actually keep those cover crops. And that is another mechanism to help mitigate climate change by sequestering carbon. And likewise in forestry, there's a lot of illegal deforestation that's happening. And so you can protect forests if you can observe every day. And that's one of our initiatives, that we're trying to use satellites and to image the world every day and see what's happening on the ground, and use that to help with some of these decarbonization activities. And then tying this all together is, how do you put this into a platform where you can help companies and governments all validate what's happening? And that's I think where the future is going, where we're having verifiable approaches. And so I'm really happy that this is a big priority for the Supercluster. I think it's nationwide and globally, it's becoming a large priority. So it's very exciting for us at Earth Daily. And one of the things I love about Supercluster is discovering new companies all the time who are working in very similar markets like Jonathan and Goddard. So I think that's some great opportunities for us to work together in the future too.
Great, thank you, Chris. In the chat, there's a couple of examples. Thank you very much for the links of interesting projects, both in and outside of Canada, that we can take a look at to see how we may be able to build upon those. Just ask if there's any other comments or feedback for us as we, further consider these topics. Annika, are there any hands up?
No other hands.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Karen. I think what we're going to try to prepare in the background for those who have been with us through this whole session. I realize we can't get to everybody for the comments, but we are going to put up some poll questions in each of these investment areas, and hopefully you can respond by giving us an indication of whether you think it is a good area to pursue or not. But while we're getting that teed up, maybe what I'll do is I'll move to the next portion, which is our talent development and digital skilling piece in particular. So maybe I'll get Sid to walk through some examples in this area.
Sounds great. Thanks, Bill. So with the opportunities in talent and capacity I mentioned, we're really focusing on people moving forward and the development of people as a lever for economic development, community development, organizational growth, and all of those pieces. You've probably heard us talk in the past about our three main pillars within the Digital Learning Lab, which is our pathways to digital jobs, leading digital change, and growing connected communities. And moving forward, we're really looking at doubling down in these areas and understanding how we can make an even bigger impact and create even other innovations in this space. So on the pathways to digital jobs example, I mentioned some of the ways in which we see a huge amount of opportunity around reskilling. We talked about digital decarbonization and some of the directions that we're heading in around the clean economy. And as those kinds of innovations and changes happen, there will be a need to reskill workers and change the way that the workforce both learns and the skills that we have writ large across Canada. So what are some other innovative pathways and ways that we can create opportunities for Canadians there, as well as how can we pull together some of the existing resources of what we're doing to create something that is more accessible to learners, to understand and be able to look and say, here's where I am in my career today. I understand the different pathways and avenues that I can take that are low cost, effective, and more rapid and more quick, so I don't have to leave the workforce for as long. And so what are some other avenues and directions that we can head down there? And some of the areas of growth that we see, like I mentioned, is around the clean economy. As well, we're seeing continued growth and emphasis on places like artificial intelligence and data science. So are there other kind of skill sets that we're seeing across the ecosystem that are growing in demand as these changes continue to happen? And other ways that we can pool resources to standardize and make learning more portable and accessible for learners. In the leading digital change pillar, this is one that, we're seeing, again, kind of continued demand for, as not just, what does it mean to be a good leader or kind of grow in your career path, but also what's the skill set and mindset that's required to create a digital innovation or to create change within an organization to navigate digital transformation. I think Alina mentioned transitioning to things like an agile workflow. These are examples of ways in which the way that we work is changing and the way that we lead teams is also changing. So what are some areas that we can work towards there? And some of the things that we're exploring are things like project-based learning, work integrated learning, multidisciplinary teams with shared leadership. What are some other innovations that can happen that change the way that we develop leaders and make the pathway upwards in someone's career more accessible? We see a lack of diversity generally in the senior leadership positions. So how can we work towards remedying that as well? For growing connected communities, again, tons of opportunity here. I mentioned that we're working across kind of urban and rural areas in our existing projects, and we really want to understand what are the levers and barriers and opportunities of both smaller remote communities as well as major urban areas and everything in between. So there's a lot of difference between the way that we might work within a small community versus something like a Vancouver or Toronto or Halifax or Regina. What are some systems level innovations that can happen in the way that community development happens that's driven by technology and driven by skills and workforce development? So these are just 3 examples of areas that we're looking to increase our innovation and our emphasis on. So I had a couple of questions here that really just get at what I was just discussing. What opportunities do we see for innovation and talent and workforce development, either that I mentioned or that you're seeing and hearing in the ecosystem? How can we encourage more demand-driven or industry-led investment in learning and development? This is something we've been really focusing on and adding more industry focus within our skilling projects, as we see kind of a need for industry to be at the table in these and ensure that the training is leading to jobs. And are there other skills or competencies that you're looking to grow in addition to the ones that I just mentioned? So floor is open. I know that I believe Jennifer Beal from SFU is on the call, and I know we've talked about these concepts and kind of what's next. So if you wanted to weigh in and add a few things.
Yeah, thanks, Sid, and thanks for inviting me to share a little bit. So just to think back a little bit too on your words, Bill, I think we are well positioned in Canada around leading in this digital space, whether it comes to the data, the trust, our responsible AI. But what we're seeing is this growing gap in our talent. And really that is what underpins all of this, all of the projects, really, when I listen to everyone speak. And so I really think that this is an important area that we need to invest in and understand, but also make sure that we keep pace with that gap and try and close it. The good thing, I think, is that we are rather humble and we have some hidden gems in terms of our talent development. And I see these kind of initiatives as actually bringing us out to be able to have the conversations. And I hear the theme of people wanting to collaborate and how can we action? How can we join in? And so how do we create more space for that and perhaps be a little bit more bold in how we're approaching some of these. An example that kind of comes to mind around what can we do to encourage some more investment in this space. I think it really does start with the conversations, but how do we create more space for that in the work that we're doing? And so what I'm finding is it's often either grassroots kind of led or that startup mentality where we're having to create these consortiums, at the will of a champion per se. And what we really need to do, I think, is create more forums like this for some of that shared visioning and lessons learned around what we wouldn't do again, and try and get to where Karen was talking about some of that collaborative ecosystem approach. And so what I might just say is, yeah, maybe an invitation, I think, to create some more of those forums, to be a little bit more bold and to coordinate some of our approaches of the good work that's already starting to go on. We just need to connect it and let the world know about it.
Thanks so much for that, Jennifer. I think that, the idea of pulling and pooling some of these resources together and having that open dialogue to make sure that these gaps are filled and that people are learning from each other is definitely a direction that we're interested in heading in. And I think the idea of just pulling groups together to be able to talk openly about that and kind of have a shared vision is a great idea. So thanks so much for sharing that. I believe Brian Roberts from BC Tech Association is also with us, and Brian is leading the BC Tech Association is leading the Digital Lift project and working across a pretty innovative approach to rapid reskilling, as well as having a vast membership of tech companies. Brian, did you want to weigh in and add anything there?
Sure. So, access to tech talent is the #1 challenge our companies are facing. And the interesting thing, though, is if you ask all industries, they're all facing talent challenges. But when you say, how are you going to solve it? They all say automation, digitization. So their solution is just compounding our challenges, which is still a good problem to have. So it would be interesting, just as we kind of look forward for talent development, to look at non-tech industries and how we build and upskill within those groups as well. And with the support of Supercluster, we've been doing some amazing reskilling projects, taking someone from non-tech roles maybe in retail, within 3 months, training them into web development or cloud development. And the results we've been seeing have been phenomenal. It's like a 90% higher rate within 6 months. So I think we've got a kind of proven model. I think there's opportunity to look into other roles that traditionally we wouldn't think could be done in a rapid skilling fashion, and figure out how you kind of chunk them up a little bit to make that all feasible. So kind of extending the reskilling thing, I think would be a great opportunity, as well as just the upskilling side of things, which we haven't quite addressed yet.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think those are both really fantastic points. And I think thinking through that kind of your comment around what are some other skill sets that can be addressed more rapidly than the way we're thinking about it, I think is a fantastic point. And one of the things that I think is happening within Digital Lift as well, and just looking at the comments, someone had asked around, do we have any demand data for the needs in skill development, specifically from an industry perspective? So I also just wanted to call attention to the fact that that your project has embedded in it real-time labor analytics and using AI to assess an understanding of what are the data needs for industry and how that's kind of shaped the way that you've designed programming. So I think that's a fantastic approach and something that we will probably be seeing more of in the future as well.
Yeah, and that's in partnership with SkyHive. So we're happy to kind of share that data. We've just recently done one, so we'll have some of that data to share to everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Were there any other questions, comments, thoughts? Medea?
One hand raised.
Yeah, go ahead, Medea.
Awesome, thank you. My name is Medea, and I work with Drypen that supports connecting job seekers to employers. And I think over the past few months, there have been some interesting trends in looking at what different regional sectors need in terms of the skills and the tools required to, I guess, bridge the skill gap. But I think there's something else that we need to think about is the fact that there's a lot of diverse, talented individuals out there that are not given equal access to the workforce, including, for example, skilled newcomers or persons with disability or those who might be on autism spectrum, as an example. So I think in I guess building synergy with all the initiatives that exist in terms of the talent workforce development, it's also building the capacity for employers, specifically small, medium enterprises, to build the capacity so they can recruit and retain those who have really interesting or special needs, but also those who might be such as like skilled newcomers who might not have equal opportunities to access the workforce. And I know in partnership with many partners across Canada, we have led initiatives that support the strategic workforce development for certain underserved population that had really interesting employment outcomes and support for businesses. So I think it just the lens of EDI in the workforce and making sure that we're building strategies that are truly inclusive. So, many years down the line, we don't look back and we see that we have left certain population out of the workforce.
Yeah, I think that's a really fantastic point. Thank you so much for raising it. And I think in the work that Ripen is doing around work integrated learning opportunities and support for employers is something that we're going to be seeing a lot more of as well. In my question, looking at how can we encourage demand-driven investments, I think the other side of that is within industry, how can we get industry and organizations more involved in the learning and development aspect as well? So it becomes kind of this cycle, ensuring that people not only are developing in-demand skills, but when they land in the organization, that organization is ready to have a diverse team, to be able to support the individual needs of the people who are working there and to support their growth in their career. So I think that's a fantastic point and something that we'll certainly be exploring more as we move forward as well. TS.
That's great. Thank you.
Hi, this is Tehmina, and I'm sorry, I'm just recovering from COVID, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me properly. I was wondering, I think we talked about a lot of very good priorities. One thing that does come to mind is the importance that connectivity plays, and based on the incident we had recently, etc. And there could be a lot of opportunities in terms of data sharing, partnership to achieve bigger, more strategic Canadian goals where telecom and the public sector, for example, on some social causes. There could be some really interesting things there as well as cross-industry. So telecom and financial services and payments is an important innovation area. And there could be a lot of things there as well. Would you see things like that that are not mentioned on the slide? Would you consider that as part of the investment that the supercluster would make?
Absolutely. I'm going to give a super quick answer in the interest of time, but then please do follow up with me via email as well. And I will say there was a comment that someone made about every job is becoming a tech job. And I think we're not looking necessarily at specific industries to say, these are the kinds of skills that we're developing for this industry, although that may be part of it, but really understanding what are some of these cross-sector collaboration opportunities, what are some industries we maybe haven't looked at in the past, but that are tech enabled. And then your point about connectivity is a great one. And I think that's something that we are doing a bit of work in terms of what are the skills that go around that. So super quick answer, but happy to chat offline as well. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Sydney. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Before we do that, though, we have a couple of homework exercises for you, if you'll bear with us. And this input is really important and helpful for us. If you have other ideas, such as other investment themes that we should be considering, just put it on the chat. But we're just going to run a quick poll here, and I'll take down my screen for a moment. Annika, can you put up the poll, please? So the poll questions are for each of our areas. We'd just like you to give us an indication as to whether it's thumbs up or thumbs down on whether you think it's worthwhile to pursue or not. And there's 4 poll questions. So if you can answer it over the course of the next few seconds, then we'll kind of get the wrap up underway. Just let me know when we're all wrapped up there, Annika.
Yeah. So.
Okay. All right. We were expecting there would be a divergence of viewpoints, which is probably what we would expect. And again, if you want to put on the chat or email us at info@digitalsupercluster.ca any additional suggestions or comments you might have, that would be terrific. So question 1 looks like we've got kind of on the agree side on critical minerals, some neutral, some disagree. Next one.
Sorry, Bill, you might just have to scroll down.
Oh, do I just need to scroll down on all of them? Okay, my apologies. Oh, looks like the health has strong votes to the affirmative, and the digital decarbonization has strong votes there. Did we do one for the talent and capacity building one as well? No, we did not, but it sounds like, did we do a poll on that as well?
That was going to be the next question.
Okay, why don't you put that one up then? Okay, terrific. Well, looks like we also have strong agreement on this area as well for talent and skills development. All right, so maybe what we'll do then is just kind of get to wrap up steps for a moment. This is obviously the beginning of many conversations we'd like to have with the folks in our community. What we'll be doing after this discussion is circulating a post session sort of email that will allow you to opt in if we're going to have some specific workshops and breakout groups that will explore some of these areas in more detail. And one of the learnings that we've had from the first phase was to look for industry sponsors who are going to be looking to solve for some of these areas and invest in them as customers or adopters. So that's one of the areas that we hope that through this collaboration effort we can find more of, and we certainly are interested in bringing more people to the table on that. And with that, I want to thank Karen, Sydney, Annika, and all the participants from our community who are part of this discussion today. We have a couple of months to kind of work through our strategy, and our doors and emails are always open to your suggestions. And we look forward to your help in furthering our phase 2 and carrying forward the momentum we built so far. So thank you everyone for joining us today.